Most Americans don't feel broke. That's the first problem. They feel tired. They feel stressed. They feel like they're always one unexpected bill away from panic, but not broke. They have a job, money comes in, rent gets paid, groceries get bought, life keeps moving, and that's exactly why this trap is so hard to see, because from the outside, everything looks normal. And when something looks normal, you stop questioning it. If you're watching this, there's a good chance you're doing what you were told to do. You work, you show up, you try to be responsible. Maybe you even make what people would call a decent salary, $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year. On paper, that should be enough. So when it still feels tight, the natural conclusion is that the problem must be you. You must be bad with money. You must be undisciplined. You must not be trying hard enough. That conclusion is convenient. Convenient for employers, convenient for banks, convenient for a system that depends on you blaming yourself instead of questioning the structure you re inside of. Because if you believe the problem is personal failure, you'll never look for a structural explanation. And if you never look for a structural explanation, nothing ever changes. Here's something most people never stop to calculate, not because they're lazy, but because no one asks them to. Take an average American income, let's say $60,000 a year. Sounds solid, sounds responsible. Now remove taxes, federal, state, payroll. Suddenly you're not at 60 anymore. You're closer to 45. Now remove rent or a mortgage, health insurance, transportation, food, utilities, minimum debt payments. Not luxury spending, not vacations, just survival. What's left is not a safety net. It's a margin so thin that one car repair, one medical bill, one job disruption can wipe out months of effort. And yet the story you hear is always the same. Budget better, save more, invest early, as if the issue were a lack of knowledge, as if millions of people all independently failed to discover common sense. This framing is not just wrong, it's dangerous, because it teaches people to optimize within a broken structure instead of recognizing the structure itself. The average American is not broke because they don't work hard. They're broke because the system they're operating in quietly absorbs their effort before it can turn into stability. Wages rise slowly, costs rise fast. Debt fills the gap, and the gap is presented as a personal responsibility instead of a design feature. Think about how debt is normalized. Credit cards aren't introduced as emergency tools, they're introduced as lifestyle tools. Build credit, earn points, don't miss out. From a psychological perspective, this matters more than interest rates, because the moment debt becomes normal, spending tomorrow's money today stops feeling dangerous. It feels responsible. It feels adult. And once that mental shift happens, you're no longer making financial decisions based on long-term stability. You're making them based on short-term relief. This is why so many people feel like they're running but never moving. Every raise is absorbed. Every gain is matched by a new expense, not because they're reckless, but because the environment is designed to convert income into obligation as efficiently as possible. Bigger paycheck, bigger apartment, better car, higher insurance, more subscriptions. The system rewards you not for building margin but for maintaining appearances. And here's the part that's uncomfortable to admit. Most Americans aren't actually trying to get ahead financially. They're trying to stop feeling anxious. That's a very different goal. Anxiety is relieved by familiarity, not by progress. Familiar spending patterns, familiar bills, familiar routines, even familiar stress. Change feels risky. Stability, even fragile stability, feels safer than the unknown. So people cling to systems that quietly drain them because those systems are predictable. The tragedy is that from the inside, it doesn't feel like a trap. It feels like adulthood. It feels like responsibility. It feels like doing what you're supposed to do. And that's why telling people to just do better financially misses the point entirely. You cannot outdiscipline a system that monetizes your compliance. You cannot budget your way out of a structure that is built on thin margins and constant pressure. If this is making you uncomfortable, that's a good sign. Discomfort is often the first indicator that something you accepted as normal deserves to be questioned. The goal here isn't to make you angry or hopeless. It's to make the invisible visible, because the moment you see the pattern clearly, you stop internalizing blame that was never meant to be yours. And this is just the surface, because beneath income, expenses, and debt, there's a deeper psychological mechanism at work, one that shapes how Americans define success, security, and self-worth. And until you understand that mechanism, no amount of tips or tactics will change how this game actually plays out. To understand why this keeps happening, you have to stop looking at money only as math and start looking at it as psychology. Numbers matter, but behavior decides how those numbers play out over time. And the most powerful force shaping financial behavior in America isn't ignorance, it's normalization. When an entire culture treats financial fragility as normal adulthood, people stop seeing it as a problem that can be challenged. Think about how early this starts. From the moment people enter the workforce, they're taught a simple narrative. Get a job, be reliable, earn more over time, everything else will work itself out. What's missing from that story is any serious conversation about margin, not profit. Margin, the space between what you earn and what you need to survive. Without margin, effort doesn't compound, it just sustains. Most Americans live without margin, not because they choose to, but because the system quietly pushes them away from it. Rent adjusts upward. Healthcare premiums increase. Transportation becomes non-negotiable. Childcare explodes in cost. None of these are luxury decisions, they're structural costs. And when structural costs consume most of your income, the idea of getting ahead becomes abstract. You're not building a future. You're managing exposure. This is where the psychological shift happens. When progress feels impossible, people optimize for comfort instead of growth. Not comfort in the sense of pleasure, but comfort in predictability. You know how much stress your current setup creates. You don't know how much stress a different one might create, so you stay, you adapt, you cope, and coping slowly replaces planning. That's why so many financial conversations feel disconnected from reality. They assume people are choosing between good and bad options. In reality, most people are choosing between bad and familiar, or bad and uncertain. The familiar usually wins, not because it's rational, but because it feels safer. The brain prioritizes emotional survival over long-term optimization. Now add status pressure to this mix. Not extreme wealth signaling, but subtle, everyday comparison. The quiet expectation to keep up without ever saying so directly. A slightly nicer apartment. A slightly newer car. A lifestyle that matches your peers so you don't feel left behind. None of this feels reckless in isolation. But over time, it creates a treadmill effect. Your income rises, but so does the baseline you feel obligated to maintain. This is one of the most misunderstood aspects of financial stress. People assume it comes from spending too much. Often it comes from spending just enough to belong. And belonging is a powerful motivator, stronger than logic, stronger than spreadsheets, stronger than advice. When financial decisions are tied to identity, they stop being evaluated rationally. They become emotional defenses. Another invisible factor is how risk is framed for the average American. You're encouraged to take risks in consumption, but discouraged from taking risks in structure. Financing a car for 6 years is normal. Carrying credit card balances is normal. Locking yourself into fixed expenses is normal. But stepping off the standard path, downsizing, changing locations, rejecting lifestyle upgrades, that's framed as irresponsible or extreme. So people end up taking the kinds of risks that benefit institutions, while avoiding the kinds of risks that could benefit them personally. This isn't accidental. Systems tend to reward behaviors that keep people predictable. Predictable earners, predictable spenders, predictable debtors. Predictability is profitable. The result is a population that works hard, follows the rules, and still feels perpetually behind. And because everyone around them is doing the same thing, the feeling becomes internalized rather than questioned. This must just be how life is now. That sentence is one of the most dangerous financial beliefs in modern America. What makes this even more difficult is that the system doesn't collapse dramatically, it erodes slowly. You don't wake up broke overnight. You wake up 10 years later wondering why all your effort didn't translate into security. Why you still feel exposed, why your stress hasn't decreased even though your income increased. Slow erosion doesn't trigger alarm bells, it triggers adaptation, and adaptation feels like maturity. You learn to live with less margin. You learn to tolerate more pressure. You learn to normalize anxiety as background noise. Over time, you stop expecting relief, you stop expecting stability, you just hope nothing goes wrong. And that hope becomes the foundation of your financial life. This is why advice that focuses only on tactics often fails. Because tactics assume a stable psychological foundation. They assume you're making decisions from a place of clarity rather than pressure. But pressure distorts priorities. Under pressure, short-term relief beats long-term advantage almost every time. That's not a moral failing, that's human behavior. If you've ever wondered why financial stress feels constant even when you're doing everything right, this is why. You're operating inside a system that rewards compliance, not resilience. A system that measures success by visible stability rather than actual security. A system where looking okay matters more than being okay. And here's the quiet truth most people never hear. Being financially stable in America often requires you to look temporarily unstable by conventional standards. Saying no to upgrades, accepting a lower lifestyle than your income technically allows, creating distance between what you earn and what you display. That goes against everything you're socially trained to do, which is why so few people do it. Not because they're incapable, but because the psychological cost feels too high. It feels like failure, like falling behind, like opting out. But in reality, it's often the first step toward regaining control. The problem is that this step is rarely framed as strength. It's framed as sacrifice. At this point, some people start asking the wrong question. So what am I supposed to do? That question comes too early. Before behavior changes, perception has to change. You have to see the system clearly enough that you stop measuring yourself by standards that were never designed for your benefit. Because until you change what you believe a successful life looks like, every financial decision you make will quietly pull you back toward the same outcome. You can't escape a trap you don't recognize as a trap. And recognition doesn't happen through tips. It happens through reframing how you interpret your own experience. And that reframing starts with understanding one core idea that almost no one explains clearly. The difference between income and leverage. Not leverage in the financial sense, but psychological leverage. The ability to say no. The ability to absorb shocks. The ability to move without panic. Without that leverage, money just passes through you. It doesn't change your position. This is the part of the conversation where things usually get simplified or motivational. That's not what's happening here. The reality is more uncomfortable because regaining leverage often means confronting habits, beliefs, and definitions of success that feel deeply personal. It means questioning things you've never been encouraged to question. And before any practical shift can happen, there's one more illusion that has to be dismantled. One belief that sits at the center of the American financial mindset and quietly shapes almost every decision people make without realizing it. This illusion is the belief that stability comes from income. It sounds logical, it feels intuitive, and it's repeated so often that almost no one questions it. If I make more, I'll finally feel secure. If I get the next raise, the next promotion, the next opportunity, things will settle. But for the average American, income rarely creates stability. The structure does, and most people never change their structure. Income is loud, it's visible, it's easy to measure. Structure is quiet, it's invisible. It shows up only when something goes wrong. When the car breaks, when a job disappears, when rent jumps, when a medical bill arrives. That's when you find out whether your life was built on stability or just momentum. The reason this illusion is so powerful is because chasing income feels productive. It feels responsible. It feels like progress. Changing structure feels uncomfortable. It often looks like regression from the outside. And because Americans are trained to equate progress with visible advancement, anything that looks like stepping back feels dangerous, even when it's strategically necessary. This is why so many people increase their income and still feel trapped. The extra money doesn't go toward leverage. It goes toward reinforcing the same structure at a higher price point, bigger rent, higher payments, more obligations. The system doesn't punish success. It absorbs it, quietly, efficiently, until the margin disappears again. What almost no one explains is that financial freedom for ordinary people rarely comes from acceleration. It comes from friction, from deliberately slowing certain things down, from resisting automatic upgrades, from creating space where none is expected. That space is what turns money into control instead of stress. And here's the uncomfortable truth. The system isn't broken in the way people think. It works very well at producing compliant, productive, financially anxious adults. Adults who work, spend, borrow, and repeat. Adults who blame themselves for outcomes that are largely structural. Adults who stay too busy surviving to step back and question the rules. That's why the average American isn't broke because they're lazy, stupid, or irresponsible. They're rebroke because they're replaying a game where the winning condition is invisible and never taught. A game where the rules reward short-term stability over long-term resilience. A game where doing what's normal slowly erodes your ability to choose. Once you see this, something shifts. You stop asking, how do I make more money? And start asking, why does my life require this much money to function? That question alone changes everything. It moves the focus from effort to design, from hustle to architecture. This doesn't mean quitting your job or rejecting ambition. It means understanding that income is only one variable, and often the least powerful one. The most powerful variable is how much of your life is non-negotiable. The more of your income that's locked into fixed obligations, the less freedom you have, no matter how high the number is. Freedom, for most people, doesn't look like wealth. It looks like margin, the ability to miss a paycheck without panic, the ability to say no to bad situations, the ability to take time to think instead of react. Those abilities don't come from earning more. They come from needing less in a very specific, intentional way. This is where people usually expect a list of tactics. Cut this, invest that, do this one trick. But tactics without a shift in perception just recreate the same cycle. You might optimize better, but you'll still be optimizing for a structure that drains you. The real shift is internal. It's deciding that your financial life is not a performance. You don't need to look successful to be successful. You don't need to match anyone else's timeline, lifestyle, or expectations. The moment you stop trying to signal stability and start building it quietly, the pressure changes. And yes, this often means being misunderstood. It means making choices that don't make sense to people who are still measuring success by appearances. That's part of the cost. But it's also part of the leverage. When you no longer need validation through spending, you regain control over your decisions. What most people discover, if they're honest, is that much of their financial stress comes from trying to maintain a version of themselves they don't actually enjoy. A lifestyle that looks fine from the outside but feels tight on the inside. Letting go of that image feels scary at first, then it feels relieving, then it feels powerful. This is why advice that promises quick wins feels good but rarely changes anything. It doesn't challenge identity. It doesn't question assumptions. It just adds another layer of effort onto an already overloaded system. Real change feels quieter, slower, less impressive, and far more effective. If you're listening to this and feeling a mix of recognition and discomfort, that's a good sign. It means you're seeing something clearly for the first time. Not a solution, but a pattern. And patterns are what allow you to make different choices without needing dramatic action. You don't fix this overnight. You don't escape the system instantly. but you can stop feeding it unconsciously. You can start making decisions that increase your margin instead of your image. You can start valuing flexibility over appearances, calm over consumption, control over comparison. That's the part no one tells you. The average American stays broke not because they don't know enough, but because they're trained to value the wrong signals. Once you change what you respond to, the system loses some of its power over you. And this channel exists for one reason: not to tell you what to buy, what to invest in, or how to get rich, but to help you see the invisible forces shaping your financial life so you can stop blaming yourself for outcomes that were designed and start making choices that quietly work in your favor. If you take nothing else from this, take this. Money is not supposed to feel like constant pressure. If it does, something in the structure is wrong, not something in you. And the moment you stop trying to outrun that pressure with effort and start redesigning the conditions that create it, everything changes. That's when income starts to matter. Not because it saves you, but because you're finally in a position to use it instead of it using you.